This is Jaime from the MidPointe Library System. I'm one of the library specialists here, but I also am an artist. And we have another pretty awesome video for you today. This time, you may not be familiar with ever doing it, which I always think this is something fun. You may be more familiar with buying it, but we'll be making stencils today, and I'll show you some tips and tricks for making them. And one thing that you can always look up is, it's called paper cutting. You can always look for different books within our library system that you can check out. Like this one's a really awesome one called Simply Paper Cutting, about hand cut paper projects. Other people will use things like a Cricut or a Silhouette, where the machine itself, you just design on your computer and you send it to the machine and it will cut it for you. And you can make stencils with those kind of machines, but there's something about hand cutting that's just really nice. And this particular book goes through, by Anna Bondic, goes through some basics on cutting and your materials, and then it has projects for you to try, because something like this really needs some practice, especially if you're not familiar with an X-Acto knife. X-Acto knife for stencil making is going to be your best friend. Scissors are okay, but you're not going to be able to get some of those really finite details like you see in this stencil. And don't freak out, we're not going to make you do this one today. This is just a good example of, once you get more used to creating a stencil, how detailed you can get. And I always believe in kind of messing around with some ideas for yourself. So like I have a page here where I just was kind of doodling what we could potentially do. I was looking at a photograph of a woman and created spaces with the shadows to still make it look like a woman with glasses, but I had to think more about the spaces, because you don't want to get too crazy close with your cuts on something like this. Or you can try to figure out, like this side, I had to think about how it connected, so that when I did pull up that paper, that it still made sense for the image. But something that's really cool with stencils is you can use it in art journaling, or where you can paint or lay paint down through these to create art pieces. Obviously, this book kind of shows you how to cut them and create decorations with the cut paper itself, but it also shows you how to do stencils, or have like a main stencil to work from. But when you're using stuff like this for art journaling or your personal artwork, you can create stuff that will help you create textures. Like this is just regular cardboard. It's actually one of those Fast Bites sandwiches that you get from Dollar Tree. And I cut it up so that I had some nice pieces to be able to cut stencils out of. Now, so this is kind of a lighter or thinner cardboard. So I knew that my hole punch that I have at home would punch through those. So since this was a small piece, I went ahead and used the hole punch to make just circles on that, because I knew that would be something kind of cool to create some artwork with. And then you can always create stuff that is letters as well, and I'll show you how to do that. Say you don't have any cardboard, but I mean, probably the best cardboard is going to be stuff like from your cereal boxes. It's usually a pretty thin cardboard, and whatever else you might have in your pantry. And you would potentially be recycling them anyway, so might as well use them. But if you had cardstock, that should work as well. You just have to be more mindful the thinner it is, that if you use it with paint, that you're going to be a little worried about how much the water might diminish your paper, because you could make something with just regular copy paper, but it is really flimsy. So maybe if you were just doing cut paper and layered cut pieces of paper on top of each other, it'd be fine. But I find with stencils, you want to have pretty dense paper. And another type of paper that I used a lot in college for my design degree is Bristol paper. You may have heard of it, you may not have. A lot of this you normally can only get at like a craft store or online. And Strathmore is the maker of it. I don't think I've ever really seen any other brand, honestly. I've just always bought Strathmore. And it's a really smooth paper, and it's usually pretty dense. Like you can hear the density in it. So this also would make good stencils if you wanted to. And that's actually what this is made out of. This is Bristol. And to start off, let's just make something simple, because you've never really probably cut with an X-Acto knife, and this is my X-Acto knife. You can be as exact as you want to be by grabbing a ruler and cutting along those lines, or just do it by hand. If you don't have a steady hand though, don't feel bad. It's okay to draw some lines and then try to use your ruler to trace along those lines to help keep your lines straight. Because if you've never really done it before, what's great about this book is it does give you some ideas, like just trying to do straight lines at first, straight cuts, see how well you do with that. Then gradually do a jagged one where it's almost like points of triangles, and trying to do the jagged one. And then it'll also show you just doing half circles, because when you're cutting, you want to move it with you, but you want to be conscious of what your other hand is doing, because you don't want to have a little accident. So on this first one, I'll just show you more straight edges, because most people have an easier time with straight edges. And I'm not going to be worried about it being perfectly straight, but we're just going to kind of mimic this one sketch that I have over here, where one side is a little wider than the other. And you don't want to get too close to the edge, but you can always sketch out what you want on the cardboard and then adjust it later as you're cutting. And there's going to be times where you cut incorrectly, and that's fine. Don't worry about that. As you're getting used to it, you'll figure it out. And I mean, even on that girl that I had cut out, she adjusted quite a bit, because sometimes it's hard to get those curves. Oops, actually I did the wrong thing. Let's see, you do want that to be small on the one side and kind of big on the other. It's basically alternating the shape, just to add something different, kind of a different shape. And really, you could even do something as simple as this, where it's a grid of open boxes. But I'm not real concerned about it trying to be perfect. You really don't have to. And it may be a little hard for you to see since it's already kind of a brown background. But you also don't have to follow exactly what I'm doing. So you would go in with your X-Acto, and It's okay. As you do stuff like this, you'll realize that you'll have a really sharp point on your blade, and sometimes that very tip of the point will break off. And you can see on this one right now that it has kind of broke off a little bit, but so far it hasn't bothered the cutting. So I just continued to use it because definitely when you do this kind of thing, you want to have a good pack of extra blades, because when you cut often, you will go through a lot of them. and also, the thinner your cardboard will be, like say if you had something pretty dense, like for some reason my cat's food in the cans is pretty heavy, you may have to score along your line a couple of different times. But that's okay, don't worry about that. Just take your time going along your pencil lines and just try out straight lines for now. And you can see that I'm just trying to follow my pencil lines. But if you don't feel comfortable doing it this way, grab your ruler and line it up with your lines to the best of your ability. And then use it as a guide for your blade. And that'll help give you a more straight line. But one thing to note, when you come to corners, go ahead and cut a little beyond the corner. It'll help give a crisp edge, and it'll make it easier for you to pop out the piece that you're cutting so that it'll come out. So, because it'll just do a little crisscross, but you'll still have this main section to use, even though you did kind of a crisscross of lines in the corners to get this to come out. And really, if you wanted to, you could always tape this kind of shape down on your paper and use it to mask certain areas. You don't have to throw this away. That's all dependent on what you want to do. And one thing you can try to do too as you're cutting, like just go completely across where you know there's kind of a straight line, but it's broken up in my design. But I'm going to do that. I can continue to go across. And you can really be exact if you wanted to. You could really measure out each individual cut and draw that out. It really depends on what you feel comfortable with and what you are wanting to create. But if you use cardboard that you have at home, like the cereal boxes, it just gives you another chance to recycle materials that won't go fully to waste, like they'll have another life. And you'll get quite a few uses out of them if you use them for painting or your art journal. And just be mindful of where your hand is, especially once you're getting toward the end of cutting. So since I'm right-handed, I want to make sure my left hand isn't down below where my knife can cut. I've had my own accidents where I've almost cut off the tip of my finger because I wasn't mindful of where it was at. And you also want to be careful with where you set your knife down, because it's still really sharp even if you're cutting paper with it. So try to make sure you're being kind of smart with your tools. And so there's that. That gives us a great kind of different shapes than the circles. One way with letters, if you wanted to try letters, and you could always do more blocky letters than that, one way to kind of make it a little easier for you is to physically print off letters, or even shapes if you don't have anything in particular in mind, or letter-wise. But something like this L is a little easier to cut out, and you can see I already did it. What's nice about that too is I also have the inside of the L that I could utilize for a piece of art. And I chose just the word love, and I printed it off so that I had each letter. And on the back, typically you would go ahead and just buy carbon paper, which is basically all the stuff that's within your pencil. But it's kind of expensive, and honestly, you can do just what I did here, where you layer pencil down on the back side of the printout, and just put it in the places where you know you're going to draw or need to draw. And you're basically adding carbon to the back of the paper in a specific spot. So much cheaper, so much cheaper. And you can just go over it in the spots that you know you really want to get. And it may look kind of funny, but it does really use a lot of that carbon within that area when you flip it over and trace it onto your cardboard. So this is kind of a cheat way to get the drawing onto your cardboard, especially if you're not real confident with how you draw like letters. So don't worry about trying to make it perfect. We all don't need to worry about that, that's for sure. Okay, so, and if you have a hard time seeing kind of where this is going to go ahead and cut it out or isolate it. So I'm just going to not cut too close because I still need some of that carbon that's on the back, but I'm fine with cutting that out so I can see about where it's going to go. And since this O is kind of small for this piece of cardboard, I'm just going to put it off in the corner because I could always fit the exclamation point over here, or maybe even the E. I'll have to see. Or if I hadn't done this L, I would have put the L maybe right there just to utilize the space. Or I could create something else. But you'll just trace on this side the edge of your circle, and you'll press kind of hard because sometimes the indentation will even show up depending on how hard you press. You don't want to break your pencil, but you want to press hard enough that it starts leaving a line for you to follow. And really, the more carbon you get on the back, the darker that line will be. But you'll just trace this letter, and that way you can kind of pick something that maybe you really like, a certain font, and you don't have to worry about tracing it exactly. But you can always try to find fonts that will be a little easier for you to cut too. Because like I said, if you pick something that's very blocky, like what's called a sans serif, which is none of the ones I really picked, but something that's very blocky, like this simply text is a sans serif. So it doesn't have any of those extra what's called serifs like these on the letters, and that'll make it a little easier for you to cut. Now circles are definitely the hardest to cut, so take your time. It's not gonna be bad to just take a breath and try to cut as easy as you can. Especially with something like this, it'll feel kind of weird and unnatural as you're pulling your knife. But again, make sure, and the way my hand goes, I like pulling out this way away from this hand. So make sure that this is more to the left side, unless if you're left-handed, then you're gonna be flipped. But with this, I'm gonna go ahead and make my first cut and try to turn the cardboard itself, and that will help you get a more rounded cut. And you can tell I'm trying to move slow to make sure that I don't get a straight line or jagged line. And don't freak out if as you finish that whole curve that the piece doesn't fall out. It just means it needs you to score it again. That you didn't cut maybe deep enough, or maybe the cardboard's just kind of on the thick side. Now this circle, what's going to be a little different about it? So the inside, you may realize, is going to disappear. So you'll see, aha, well, what happened to that stencil? Oh, shoot. Well, we can't have the inside in it. You could always tape it down, but a lot of times that's going to be a hassle. But I wanted to show you how, like, this might be an oops for you, because you want that inside to stay within here if you can. So you may have to edit before you cut to make sure that your inside will stay within here. Yeah, you'll have like a little line that will show up, especially if you use it with paint. But if you were just drawing letters out and you were using these to trace, you could always erase that line that's created with the stencil. But that's why a lot of times when you see letters, you'll notice that they'll have a piece connected. So with bot stencils, you'll notice that there will be this piece in the middle that's connecting, and technically the circle, or the O, is two pieces, and that's fine. That's how they can make sure that you get the actual shape of the letter. So if they did this, you would just have a big circle. You wouldn't have your O or zero. And but this would still work if you were going to cut out the center and then use this as your masking. So if you mask or cover your paper with the L and the O, you'll be able to have the impression of this shape on your piece. And it'll make more sense when we're actually creating something. But with something like this, you can go ahead and cut out the center. But basically what I'm saying then is on this, as you're tracing it, go ahead and add little connectors to help hold that center in. Because something like the L, it didn't matter. The V doesn't matter. because you want all of this to be separate. It doesn't have a piece that completely cuts off, but the E here, you can see this part would fall out after you cut it. So you would probably leave a little piece at the top and at the bottom still connected so that it doesn't fall out when you cut it. And so that's just some of those things where you need to kind of plan a little bit as you're doing these things. But obviously something like this that I showed you at the very beginning is just something to do if you're more used to X-Actos. And I drew directly on this and then cut it out with the X-Acto. And I made edits as I was cutting as well, because sometimes you'll notice some things may be a little too thin. You want enough paint to be able to go through to give a good impression of your image. But other than that, this sort of gets you started on making your own stencils and to utilize the pieces that you have at home. X-Acto knives can be bought at Michael's or even Lowe's. Usually have some of these type of X-Actos, or Hobby Lobby, whichever you would like. Probably Walmart would be the cheapest, but they also have X-Actos, or Meyer, so you can really get them anywhere. But other than that, I hope you really had a great time kind of checking out making stencils. I'm sure it's something kind of different for you, but it's a really great thing to utilize within artwork and a chance to kind of recycle some of your random pieces of cardboard at home. But thank you for joining me, and I hope you have a creative and amazing day.